maybe a little bit of a playoff preview as well.
Philadelphia Eagles are looking forward to clinching their second NFC East Division title in 3 years, and the Washington Commanders are looking forward to making them do it next week against the Dallas Cowboys.
I don't think Penn State's on upset alert against the Mustangs, but if you ask SMU experts, they say otherwise.
The Oklahoma Sooners, they got their guy.
The Locked On Podcast Network presents The Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
The rematch, we talk about how both teams have changed since this first meeting and a lot more.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It has been wild times for both of these teams since they last played. The Steelers have gone 2-2 in the 4-game stretch. The Ravens 2-1 with a bye. Both teams are in the heat of the AFC North race. The Steelers have a game up on the Ravens after they lost last week. The Ravens beat the Giants, and now these two teams are meeting in this game. If the Steelers win, they clinch the AFC North. The race is over, and then it's about wild card teams and seeding for the Steelers. If the Ravens win, it still will come down to the last 2 games of the season, where if the Steelers win out, they would still win the division because of tiebreakers. But of course, that becomes a bigger question with the Chiefs coming to town on Christmas, the Ravens going to play the Texans, lots of stuff there. But one thing that's been noticeable on tape, one thing that's been noticeable to everyone, the Ravens' pass defense has gotten better than when it was. And it kind of started with their performance in the Steelers game. And the Steelers acknowledged that a lot when we talked to them in the Steelers locker room on Wednesday. What has been the impetus of that change, Kevin?
Yeah, Chris, there's a lot that goes into it. I think the big thing is after the Ravens beat the Bengals on Thursday Night Football the week before they played the Steelers, it's now come out that there was a very fiery closed door / open forum meeting between the defense and the coaching staff, players. And it was very much so hey, let's get all our issues out. Let's air everything out. And how can we get better? And so it wasn't like finger pointing and like, oh, you're doing this wrong. Like, you're terrible. Like, you get out of here. It was more so, hey, if you want to play, and Marlon Humphrey ended up saying this was kind of the message of the meeting. If you want to play, you want to win, you want to put in the work, you're going to have a spot on that field. If you don't, you're going to be on the bench. And that's exactly what's happened here, where Marcus Williams, their $70 million man, has not played for them. And it's been a while since he's been on the field for them. Eddie Jackson, who actually didn't make the trip to Pittsburgh due to personal reasons, and that ended up being he was unhappy with his role. The Ravens said, you're not playing well anyway. See you later. You're now off the team. But the big thing to me is they've moved Kyle Hamilton back to more of a traditional safety role. They've played him more. It's instead of putting them all around, putting them up at the line, middle of the defense, they've now moved him back. And it's now him and Ardarius Washington is the 2 safeties for the team. And that, I think, has calmed everything down on all 3 levels. It is, I guess, redefined certain roles, but in a good way. And I think the defense is playing more free with that, where you're not relying on another guy to do what Kyle Hamilton's doing right now. Hamilton can play anywhere. You can put him anywhere. He's that good. But to me, especially, you're right, the game against Pittsburgh really started this upward trajectory for them. It's been just about building confidence, too. And partially the Ravens playing well, sometimes teams gifting the Ravens turnovers, like that Russell Wilson throw in the Pittsburgh game in the end zone. I know he was trying to darn Washington was supposed to go up for that ball, but it just landed in the hands of Marlon Humphrey. And like, hey, that's a momentum play for you. That's great. So it's been a very, very good thing, because a lot of people in Baltimore, Chris, were wondering. It's like, well, the passing offense is great in Baltimore. The rushing offense is great. The rushing defense is great. Well, it's just that pass defense. If they can figure that out, they can be a very dangerous football team. And although you mentioned they're 2-1 before the bye and everything, I still think that this Baltimore Ravens team has done a tremendous job turning that secondary around.
I mean, it certainly has been. You look at the lack of explosive plays that they've allowed since that Steelers game, and even in that Steelers game, it speaks volumes to what they're doing there, and they're trying to play to their strengths, and that's sometimes what you need to do. Kyle Hamilton's a big part of this team's future, and letting him play to his strength, that seems like it makes a lot of sense. Moving Marlon Humphrey, inside a little bit more, that allows him to kind of get physical and make more plays like he did in that Steelers game. So I get the sense there that's a big part of this too. And the Steelers are trying to make their own changes. Now, granted, they're coming off a tough loss to the Eagles, but I do think that Russell Wilson started to find himself a little bit more in this offense after the Ravens game. They had a tough week against Cleveland in the snow, short week on the road. Blizzard hits mid game. It kind of changes things. But after that, they light up the scoreboard against the Bengals for 44 points. They outscore the Browns, and they kind of hold back at the end, just trying to run out the clock, 27 points there. But in both of those contests, Russell Wilson against the Bengals hits 10 different guys with passes. Against the Browns, 9 different guys. Now, against the Eagles, that changed up a little bit, and part of it, I think, is because the Eagles are just a really good defense, and George Pickens wasn't in the game, and so that kind of limited what they were doing. But I think that's where this game is going to come down to, is how much improved is the Ravens defense against a quarterback like Russell Wilson, because in the stretch since then, they played Justin Herbert, good quarterback, good passing attack that came out on top. They played the Eagles, like the Steelers, didn't win that one, and then they beat up on the Giants. So Russell Wilson, interesting challenge for that, especially with the way that he attacked this Ravens defense. Is this a defense that can afford to, do 2 deep looks and protect against the deep ball while also defending the Steelers' run? I think that could be a big part of this game if they're able to pull that off, take away the deep ball while also taking away the run game.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge part for Baltimore, at least, being able to stop any explosive plays the Steelers offense might be able to make. And I know we're going to get into the availability of some of these guys a little bit later on in the show, but on the defensive side of the ball for Baltimore, it's going to be massive. Plus with Pittsburgh, we know that, especially in that Eagles game, Pittsburgh, they didn't play their best football, but they were still in the game with some time left. And I know that people were kind of wondering, is Pittsburgh going to win the game? Who knows? But in my opinion, I think that when these two teams match up, Baltimore and Pittsburgh, and we've been talking for years, Chris, we know this. This is going to be one of those like slobber knocker games that is going to come down to the wire, and you can throw everything out the window. Doesn't matter how good each team is. It's just going to be one of those games. But it feels like there is a different mood, at least in Baltimore this week. Obviously, Ravens-Steelers week has rivalry. It's rivalry week. It's Steelers week, Ravens week. But we can be honest about this, Chris. I'll be honest about this. This really hasn't been a rivalry over the last handful of seasons because Baltimore's lost 8 of their last 9 games to the Steelers, and the Ravens are mad about that. The Ravens want to rid that trend. And Roquan Smith, I think, put it best for both teams here. This is a check your manhood game because everything is on the line here. AFC North crown, and from a Baltimore perspective, you cannot let a division rival, especially your most heated rival in the Pittsburgh Steelers, celebrate a division title on your home field. So they're going to do everything in their power to try to stop this. I think it's going to be a very intense, very physical game, and a lot of that, I think, too, is going to come down to which team is able to execute at a higher level, which, again, we're going to talk about a little bit later on in the show. But this Steelers team, they've had Lamar Jackson's number. Obviously, the defense has done their job on him over the course of Lamar's career. And actually, fun or maybe not so fun fact, depending on how you look at it, is Lamar has only played in 1 game against the Steelers at home as a starter, and that was in 2020, back when they only allowed 4,000 fans in the stadium because that was obviously the pandemic and going through all that. And Lamar has also never played both games in a season against Pittsburgh. So a lot of new milestones happening for a 7-year veteran quarterback in Lamar Jackson. I'm excited to see how it pans out.
Certainly I am too, because Lamar Jackson's a guy I've always had a high reverence for. Even when he was coming out of Louisville in the draft, I thought he was fantastic, and I thought the Steelers should be considering him at the time. And here he is playing really well for the Ravens, and the Steelers have just been that one team that he just hasn't figured out how to get over the hump. His only win is the game against Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph back in 2019 when he started against them there. And yes. Since then, he's only played, 4 other times we talked about how Lamar's missed so many big games in this rivalry. The Steelers are hoping to not miss their best player, and that's TJ Watt. He got injured late against the Eagles. I do think the Steelers got a big break in what it was. It looked like a non-contact ankle or Achilles injury initially. It turned out it was a lower ankle injury instead of a high ankle injury, which was, a blessing. And I can tell you, Kevin, right now, Mike Tomlin seems very confident about TJ Watt's ability to play this week when we talked to him at the top of the week on Monday. And then, the Steelers, they've been working him in. We've seen videos from practice where he's been able to be part of the practices. The Steelers are certainly limiting him, but I think that, TJ Watt, he's not a first or second or third year player who needs to go through reps. They're going to rest him until game day. I do think that TJ Watt will play in this game unless there's some unforeseen setback. However, the big question is still George Pickens, who has not officially practiced this week. We've seen videos of him doing drills at practice, showing that he's still fast, still explosive, but hamstring injuries are tricky. And I think those two being available, that's your best playmaker on offense for Russell Wilson. That's your best playmaker on the entire team. And, maybe the defensive player of the year, people are talking about, he's still in that conversation. On the other side of the ball, that's two big factors that both teams have to watch, including also Deshaun Elliott, who's been a really good safety for the Steelers this year. And the Ravens know he used to be over there.
Yeah. And if TJ Watt is unable to play, obviously that's a huge loss. Again, from what you said, Chris, seems like he might be able to go in this one, but I am really looking at the George Pickens situation, especially because when you talk about with what this Ravens team has, there's a lot of, sorry about the siren.
It's okay.
My bad on that. But that's for me, at least, with this Ravens team and the way this pass defense has played, there's a lot of different situations of, well, if George Pickens plays, that's the guy you have to stop. If George Pickens doesn't play, well, who do you stop? Is it Van Jefferson? Is it Calvin Austin? Who is it going to be? Pat Frymuth's obviously an option in the passing game. You cannot discredit what he can do. But wide receiver wise, I already kind of favor Baltimore secondary, even with Pickens in there. You just have to kind of slow him down. But if Pickens is out, there's going to be so many other things that can go on. So for me, I think that if Pickens doesn't play, that's a huge loss for Pittsburgh. And we kind of saw last week that Steelers passing offense fizzle out without him, because I think he means so much, especially with the lack of depth that they have at that position.
No, I mean, one thing that Pickens gives you right away is the ability to throw deep and for him to go win those one-on-one balls. Russell Wilson likes to throw those out. Russell Wilson's also shown he will do that to anybody. He completed one of those to Scotty Miller a couple of weeks ago, several yards downfield. Mike Williams has gotten some of those, but having George Pickens forces defenses to honor him. And if they don't, immediately, one-on-one, we're going that way. And if they do, well, know that there's two defenders someplace, and Russell Wilson's a smart quarterback. He quickly picks at that and he will go another way. So injuries playing a big role in this one, but so will, I think, two key battles that these two teams are facing each other, and that involves turnovers and third downs. Now, last week, the Steelers gave up 10 third down conversions out of 17 attempts on the Eagles. That was the most third down conversions allowed in a single game by the Steelers defense all season. They dropped from being the second best third down defense to being the seventh best in a single week with their percentage points. Meanwhile, the Ravens' third down offense, second best in the league right now. They have been really clutch. The only team with a better third down percentage than them is the Kansas City Chiefs. To me, that's going to be a big part of this. Is can the Steelers get back to playing, really well on third downs? Can they win that? In the previous matchup, the Steelers defense kind of won out on third downs, 4 out of 11 for the Ravens. Granted, the Steelers offense didn't do too well either, 4 out of 16, but I feel like that point's been big, but also the turnover aspect. You talked about, we've talked about how Marlon Humphrey played a big role with that interception he had in the end zone. The Steelers responded with their own interception right after that. The Steelers are a +18, leading the NFL, tied with the Bills in their turnover differential. The Ravens are only a +2, and I think that those two things, third downs and turnovers, both teams are scheming up how to get the best advantages in those moments right now.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
Maybe a little bit of a playoff preview as well.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
One of the things you talk about, Danielle Hunter, and you talk about Will Anderson, and I think that's a great place to start when you start talking about matchups in this game, because you're looking at a situation, and I'm guessing based on what happened last week and the fact that Humphries hasn't played, that they're going to be going up against Joe Thuney, who is a left guard, not a tackle, and Juwan Taylor. Juwan Taylor's been okay. He's been better this season than he was last year. Not what you would want probably as your starting right tackle for the money that you're paying him. But Joe Thuney is a phenomenal left guard, but he's not going to be playing there. And now you're in a situation where you're going to have him go up against a guy that's leading the NFL in sacks and pressures, and that's going to be a tough assignment for him. And I do think that one of the things Kansas City needs to focus on this week is trying to maybe run directly at him early on, and not saying that he can't stop it to some extent, but run directly at him and then try to come back and do the quick passing game and try to get the ball out quickly and wear him out that way, because I don't think you want to be taking deep shots on it with a guy that can't really roll out. We'll see what Mahomes looks like, but this is going to be something that's concerning going into this game for me.
Yeah, one of the things that's concerning, one of the biggest concerns for me, and we've spoken about the Houston Texans offense and some of their, inefficiencies this season. And I mean, anytime you have Chris Jones, no matter where he lines up, D'Amico had a lot to say. Head coach of the Houston Texans, D'Amico Ryans, had a lot to say about Chris Jones and the way that he can move up and down the line. He said you can play him on the inside. You might see him playing on the outside, and him giving, every offensive lineman that he goes up against fits. And I had a chance on Wednesday to speak with left tackle Laramie Tunsil, and he said it's going to be a good matchup for Titus Howard, who has moved from the right tackle position to the left guard to help shore up some of that line. And that's going to be a tough matchup for him, especially for somebody who, this is the first game. I mean, this will be the second game he's played at that position in a very long time. And going up against Chris Jones and, the way they slide him, like I said, up and down that line, it's going to be tough on CJ to be able to recognize where Chris Jones is at all times, because that's going to be the key. Also, the Kansas City Chiefs have a very, very good run defense, and you have to make sure that if the Texans want to be effective, if they want to be effective against Kansas City, I think that they're going to have to get Joe Mixon going in that running game and get him going early and often as they can, so he can open up maybe some passing lanes for CJ to throw the ball to Nico Collins. Maybe we can get Tank Dell involved a little bit more this week. Maybe you can see a little bit more of Dalton Schultz, and even using Joe Mixon out of the backfield as a pass option. And so that is one of the biggest concerns that I have when I'm looking at the Kansas City team and saying, here is a team that starts and stops. As much as I've talked about the Houston Texans defensive line, I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs have a very good defensive line as well, led by Chris Jones. And so, that's going to be interesting. And real quickly, I want to see how on the defensive side of the ball, how rookies Kalen Bullock from the safety position and Kamari Lassiter will match up against, even if Patrick Mahomes is injured. I mean, his arm isn't, his mind isn't.
True.
And he can manipulate you. He can navigate anything. If he gets to an open spot, he'll make you think that he's throwing right all the while he's looking at, left, which could be former Houston Texans DeAndre Hopkins, who is still a very reliable wide receiver and very good possession receiver. or Travis Kelce still being effective as he is, finding spots in the zone to be able to sit down. And so I'm eager to see how DeMeco matches with his former coach in Andy Reid when DeMeco was there in Philadelphia for 1 year with Andy in I think it was 2012. So it's going to be a matchup of the minds. And I don't think that here's the funny thing real quick, Chris. I don't think that each team is going to go out and give too much because they could potentially be playing again in a couple of weeks.
No, and that's a great point. And I do think that actually plays into this. And I think that actually plays into how Kansas City looks at all these 3 games as well, because you're right. They could be playing all 3 of these teams in the next month and a half again. And that wouldn't be the best scenario for Kansas City in any way, shape, or form. So you talk about the rookie safeties. What that brings my mind to is I'm sitting here kind of getting a little bit giddy, if I'm being honest, because to me that says Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown on a deep route somewhere. You got 2 of the fastest guys in the NFL that are going to be on this roster, and I think Hollywood does play this week. I don't know how much he'll play, but I do think he's been full in practice both times, so I do think that they're going to have him out there, especially considering that it's a short week against the Steelers the next week. So I think that's going to be intriguing to see how that works out. Really the last thing for me is, and you kind of mentioned this, the Chiefs' run defense has been fantastic this season. I'm not going to say that they've been shut down and they're keeping running backs under 50 yards a game. That's not what I'm trying to say. But when you can keep running teams to 60, 70 yards, usually most games you're going to be good. It's when you get in a scenario where they're running and gashing you for 5 or 6 yards a carry and they get up to 95, 100, 120 yards, because that wears your defense out. 50, 60 yards you can deal with. And if they can stop the running game, that makes it a lot harder for CJ to be able to hit in the passing game.
Yeah. And you have going up against one of the toughest things in trying to stop Joe Mixon is he's very good on the cutbacks. He's very good going one way and can switch and change directions. And, you think that you have him stop going right for a 2-yard loss, and then he cuts back to the left and picks up 20 yards.
Got to be very defensively sound.
Yes, for sure.
So, all right. I know we're not going to give score predictions, but how do you see this one shaking out?
I actually believe that the Houston Texans will get themselves together offensively and pull out the win, especially going up against a hobbled Patrick Mahomes. Now, Patrick was fully healthy. My prediction would be a little bit different because Kansas City is so good, but I do believe that with the defense that the Houston Texans have and getting CJ, that we've seen glimpses of CJ against Miami having some of that old CJ magic. I think that the Texans will go up there and pull out a win.
Well, I'm not going to give a score either right now. You'll get that from me on the preview show tomorrow. But I will say I think that Kansas City finds a way to win this game. I do think that Andy Reid has looked at the schedule and he's figured out exactly how he wants to attack the last 3 weeks of the season. And this plays into that. And the only reason that you're going to have Mahomes out there and playing is because you think that you need him to go out and win this game, because you are looking at the last 2 games going, I don't want to have to win both those games to get the number 1 seed. Because the reality is you're in a situation where you haven't had a bye week since week 6. You could almost find a way to get 2 bye weeks if you can win this game, because you can rest some players against the Steelers, and then they have to go win against the Broncos and get another week of rest as the number 1 seed. So we'll see what happens.
Philadelphia Eagles are looking forward to clinching their 2nd NFC East division title in 3 years, and the Washington Commanders are looking forward to making them do it next week against the Dallas Cowboys.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on with the Philadelphia Eagles? Because I understand city of brotherly love, AJ and Jalen are feeling it. What's going on with Philly?
It is crazy how different 1 week in the NFL can make, where at this time last week, we're putting out fires. Jalen Hurts apparently hates A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown hates Jalen Hurts. Brandon Graham hates everything that's going on. It's going on Eagles radio to just light this thing on fire with gasoline. And then they have the passing performance they did against Pittsburgh. And all is well. Suddenly they're seen as the best team in football, according to a lot of national media outlets, fans, and, pretty much everybody alike. They have a chance to get the 1 seed, tied at 12-2 with Detroit, riding a 10-game win streak. They've never done that in franchise history. So I think a lot of what happened last week was definitely overblown. It was certainly a problem. Their passing inconsistencies was an issue that was ignited by public comment. But I think after that performance against the Steelers, against an elite defense, the vibes are pretty high right now in Philadelphia. And this is a big game to not only clinch the division, but like I said, they got to try to catch Detroit and Minnesota here and secure that home field advantage.
Yeah, man, look, I don't know if I would get on board with the Eagles being the best team in the NFL. I think the Buffalo Bills probably have the biggest stake to that claim right now.
To argue.
In the NFC, man, I mean, look what the Lions are going through. Like David Montgomery is he's on his third opinion trying to save.
That's when you know it's
season.
over. When you're asking a third doctor, that's when you know your stuff's messed up.
I mean, look, I applaud him for trying. That's the heart of the warrior right there. I applaud him for trying. But what they're going through, the Minnesota Vikings, is Sam Darnold real, not real? I think the Eagles certainly have a stake to claim to being the best team in the NFC. Obviously, the best team in the NFC East, because whether it comes against Washington, Dallas, or the New York Giants, I mean, the Eagles need one win to clinch. They're going to get that win, right? I mean, we're trying to delay the inevitable here in Landover, Maryland this weekend is what we're trying to do. But the question here is, are we to the point now? And like you said, the difference a week makes, because I've been on a lot of shows and I've said, as weird as it kind of sounds, the key to beating the Philadelphia Eagles is to make Jalen Hurts be the savior of the game. Because if Saquon needs to be the savior, we know Saquon can be the savior. Is it fair to say that now the Eagles are finding a balance to where if Jalen needs to save the game, he can?
Yeah, I think so. And I think over the last 2 years, he's shown he can do that. Is he ever going to be the consistent pocket passer inside a structure, the processor of a Pat Mahomes, a Joe Burrow, even to a degree, like, of course, Josh Allen right now or Lamar Jackson? Probably not. He's an RPO quarterback that goes off field, very rhythm and momentum based. Like, he's going to rely on explosive plays outside of structure with his mobility, throwing the deep ball. But you weren't even really getting that, David, like, throughout this 10-game win streak. That was the problem. Was I'm not asking for 2022 MVP finalist Jalen Hurts that we saw in Super Bowl 57, but you weren't even getting the Jalen Hurts of early last year, who was inconsistent, but you still got a lot of great moments. What he showed against the Steelers showed us that he still does have that greatness in him at times against really good defenses and big moments. Like, that's a game you got to have. So I think the confidence is instilled now in this football team that if they have to do that, they can. Are they suddenly going to change their identity and start throwing the ball 30 plus times again? No. That Saquon Barkley is still the Batman of this offense, but I do think Jalen Hurts showed on Sunday he can be Robin, and if he's got to be Batman at times, especially in the biggest spots, i.e. January and the postseason coming up, he can still be that player.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Jalen Hurts, man. I remember before that Super Bowl run, the season that Super Bowl run happened, and I went on an Eagles podcast. I can't remember the name of it now, to be honest with you. I apologize. It's been a while. And I praised Jalen Hurts to the point where that host actually said, hold on, let me ask you something. If the Philadelphia Eagles called right now and said, give us a first-round pick or, say, a third and a future third for Jalen Hurts, would you take that deal? And I, without hesitation, said, yes, I would take that deal. And he said, well, I hope that you become the GM because I would love to take that deal too. And then the end of that season, Jalen Hurts is in the Super Bowl for the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm feeling vindicated. And then now this season and, towards the end of last season, the collapse and all that stuff, I'm kind of like, oh, like maybe this is where that guy was kind of talking about. So to see him kind of rise back up a little bit, certainly, from someone who loves the way that Jalen Hurts plays the game, I'm enjoying it. Of course, looking forward to hopefully the Commanders being able to stifle him on defense. That overblown storyline of A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts hate each other, not started, but certainly doused with gasoline by Brandon Graham, defensive lineman, teammate. And certainly, he tried to backpedal it, but you know how this goes, man. As soon as it's out there, it's out there.
Oh, yeah. And
this Eagles defense. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, too, like, I want to give Jalen some credit. I don't think a lot of the passing, quote unquote, issues of the last 9 games were always issues. Like, there were games they were inconsistent, but I also think he embraced being a pocket passer, or I should say a game manager that knew they were going to run the football to win games. So he took over a more cautious approach and wasn't being as aggressive and kind of took a back seat. So I think that was also a calculated decision from Jalen to, not always force things and be aggressive. So overall, I think he knew he had to turn it up this Sunday to prove everybody wrong. And I think that was really good to see.
And there's something to having a quarterback who doesn't require the spotlight too.
Sure.
Right? Like
it's a great
it
point.
can be frustrating while he finds kind of the happy medium and really finds the groove and all that stuff. I get
That's
that.
the key.
But having a guy that doesn't need the spotlight, I think is really huge for a team that's got a lot of talent and a lot of spotlight to share with other people. But defensively, Louis, we're going to talk about the defense that the Philadelphia Eagles brought up against the Commanders last time. Again, because it was incredibly impressive. I'm still flabbergasted every time I talk about it. But overall, Philadelphia Eagles defense, how's that unit looking? How has Vic Fangio got that group going?
I can't believe that they're number one in so many categories on defense. Like, they've been the best defense in football over the last 2 months. And I mean, they're the youngest team in football on defense. That's the most incredible part about it. I was excited heading into the season. I didn't think they would be this far along. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell doesn't just look like a rookie of the year favorite, but also a first team all pro candidate. And, Cooper DeJean already looks like one of the best slot corners in football. Their defensive line, Jalen Carter, is a game wrecker that teams have to double every play, and it's opening things up for Nolan Smith and Josh Sweat. Milton Williams having a breakout year. Philadelphia never has good linebackers. They've got 2 of them right now, into Kobe Dean and Zach Bond. So, the defense overall, Vic Fangio, there's been years where the Eagles defense is really great because of coaching, and there's been years where it's really great because of personnel. This year, it's finally this perfect marriage of the coach understanding the personnel and the personnel just being in the perfect position to succeed. So they have really dominated, and they're not winning in spite of any position on that side of the ball right now.
Yeah, and look, I know Howie Roseman does not get near the credit that he should. Of course, I'm joking, because Howie Roseman gets all the credit in the world. But the fact that Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean are doing what they're doing. I mean, outside of cornerback, arguably the hardest position to transition from college football to the NFL.
I totally agree.
And they got 2. They got 2 who are like, "What do you mean it's hard?
Yeah,
we're just doing this thing."
And David, that's the one thing Howie was just never good at, was finding young cornerback talent. If you look at when they won the Super Bowl in 2017, they won in spite of corner. 2022, it was veteran corners. He finally invested in corners in the draft early. And like you said, he got not just 1 stud, but 2. It really is unbelievable. I've been screaming on this podcast from the mountaintops over the last few years for him to do this. And finally he did, and it's working out.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. And you can take a look maybe at some Thursday night football. The Chargers actually slight favorites tonight over the Broncos in LA. FanDuel has the Chargers laying 2.5. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
Before we make full-on predictions here, Tyler, I just want to reiterate how awesome this moment is. And you can correct me if I'm wrong or if you've heard different, but I feel like a lot of the fans here in the state of Indiana, they're excited about the matchup of Indiana-Notre Dame, but they're also a little disappointed because one of the teams from our state is going to be eliminated in the very first round rather than both of them having the opportunity to make a run. Have you felt that on your side?
No, I have not. I have not encountered as much overlap between the fan bases. I guess maybe it's my own social media timeline has just become so toxic in the past few days. But it has been pretty funny to see the discourse between Notre Dame fans and Indiana fans. And I'm not going to say that one fan base has been more hostile towards the other, because I think the loud minority makes everyone look bad regardless of the fan base. Yeah. But I have appreciated how, obviously Curt Cignetti is a very confident guy and he's very confident in his team. And I think his team is a reflection of that. But I also think the fan base is a reflection of that as well. I don't get the impression at all that Indiana fans are just happy to be here. They think they can win and they think they should win. Do I have that correct?
Absolutely. And whether that, some would say it's a false confidence because, again, it's, Indiana's strength of schedule and they played one tough team and they lost. Whatever. We've dominated so many people, and this team is still good enough to make a run. Win it all? I don't know. There's some really good teams here, but the Hoosiers expect to win this thing. I mean, This is the most historic season in the history of Indiana football. They don't want it to come to an end, and they believe that they can get past Notre Dame, even if it is on the road. And, man, have you seen the ticket prices for this game? It's absurd. It's the most expensive ticket of the first round.
It's actually insane. I will be at the game. Fortunately, I had a friend get me a ticket for face value, so I don't have to basically put a month's rent on this ticket. So grateful for that. But I am interested to hear, what do you think the turnout is going to be? Because I know from the Notre Dame side, they have taken several steps to try to ensure that it is a very pro Notre Dame crowd. The tickets never went to market. Indiana was only given $3,500 to start, and that includes marching band and relatives of the players, the families, all that stuff. But I also know that Indiana and the Hoosier faithful are going to make the trip to South Bend, but getting into the game is a whole different story. So I think it's going to be about like 80-20 Notre Dame to Indiana, which would still give you about like 16,000 Indiana fans in the game, and they're going to be wearing red and everyone's going to see them. So I think it's going to be a great environment, and I expect to see a whole lot of red this weekend. But inside the stadium, it's like you said, man, it is tough to get in.
Yeah, it is. And that's the feeling I've gotten from my community at Locked On Hoosiers is it's a tough ticket, man. It's hot. And look, it's Christmas time. It's tough to come off that type of money. Totally understand. But Indiana fans are seeing this maybe not as a once in a lifetime because we expect to be good in the future, but this is the biggest game Indiana football has ever played in. I mean, let's just say it like it is. And so they're going to do anything they can. I think 80-20 is probably about right. Maybe 75-25, but I expect the Notre Dame faithful to show up and be ready to go. It will be a legit road game for Indiana, one that they haven't had to play in all that often. And so it comes down to it. Notre Dame, Indiana, first game of this expanded college football playoff. The entire country will be watching on Friday night on ESPN. I'm jealous that you're going to get to be there. What does Notre Dame have to do to beat Indiana? And do you think they do it?
They have to be able to run the ball. And it's so like cliche to say, right? Like every game is won on the line of scrimmage and you got to be able to establish the run. Like that's true. Like 90% of the time across all levels of football, high school, college, NFL, whatever the case may be. But Notre Dame is going to try and run. And even though Indiana has statistically one of the best rushing defenses in all of college football, they have some real serious players in their front seven. Notre Dame is going to come out early and try to challenge them. And if they are able to lean on them, if they are able to run the ball with Jeremiah Love, who I believe is, I know this is going to surprise some people because one running back was just in New York for the Heisman Trophy. I think Jeremiah Love is the most talented running back in all of college football, but he hasn't had nearly the same workload as Ashton Genty or even a Cam Scadaboo at Arizona State, but he is electric. Now he shares the rock with Jadarian Price, another very talented running back. And as I talked about earlier, Riley Leonard is going to run a lot in this game as well. So they're going to get creative in their run game. If they are able to run the ball, I think they're going to be able to control the game that way, shorten it up a little bit. So that would be my biggest key. But because if Indiana stops the run and they force Riley Leonard into passing situations, he really has not been forced to pass that much this year. And I don't have as much confidence in his throwing ability, especially in weather like this. So if Indiana is able to stop the run, I'm not sure if Notre Dame is going to be able to pull it out, but I like the Irish to win 28-17. I think it's going to be a close game throughout and they get a late touchdown to pull away, get the win and cover that 7.5 point spread. But don't get me wrong here. This is going to be an absolute battle for the entire game.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the Riley Leonard running situation because I think that's one of the keys for Indiana is we have to be able to stop him, whether it's a design quarterback run or whether he's just making a play with his legs to extend a play. We've got to be able to keep him contained. And Indiana hasn't gone up against very many running quarterbacks this year, but when they did contain him. I look at Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. That was the situation where everybody was concerned. He's going to run all over Indiana. Can they contain him? Can they stop him? And they did. And so if Indiana can do that and not turn the ball over, talk about cliche and basics. I mean, that goes back to Pee Wee football, Tyler. Don't turn the ball over, something Indiana did a couple of times against Ohio State. Interceptions, fumbles, bad special teams. Those basic things are what make the difference in a big-time playoff game. So stop Riley Leonard running the ball and don't turn it over. If Curtis Rourke can continue to play at the high level that he did almost all season long, except when he had the thumb injury, and Indiana can get their ground game going too, I think we have a chance. And I think we pull off the upset. We're about a touchdown underdog. I think we keep it close. I think we get a stop defensively and a late field goal, one we haven't had to do very often. We don't kick very many field goals because we've scored so many touchdowns this year. But I think Indiana gets it done. I'm going to say 24-21. Indiana walks out of South Bend and they go to play Georgia in the second round of the playoffs. I hope it's a good game either way. And I think it will be, man. What a special moment this will be Friday night.
Yeah, it's going to be a great game. It sounds like we're both on the under. I would suggest anyone betting on this game, that would probably be the safest bet. I just don't really see either one of these defenses giving up a lot of points. I think it's going to be stingy. I think you're going to see a lot of run-heavy stuff early on, try to set the tone. But it's going to be a great night, man. Great game. I can't wait for it.
Tyler Wojak of Locked On Irish, Jacob Goins of Locked On Hoosiers. Be sure, if you're watching us on YouTube, to like these videos, give your score predictions down below, subscribe to each one of the shows. And for all of our audio listeners, we appreciate you being there as well. Follow, subscribe, turn on notifications, do whatever you got to do to never miss an episode of Locked On Irish and Locked On Hoosiers. Tyler, thanks so much for your time, my man.
Anytime, man.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
I don't think Penn State's on upset alert against the Mustangs, but if you ask SMU experts, they say otherwise.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Penn State and SMU, let's start with this because everyone around Penn State, whether it's fans or even myself included, think this should be a comfortable win for Penn State. The spread is 8.5. But SMU did not get here by accident. I know they lost the ACC championship game. I don't look at them as that group of 5 holdover. And Alex, before we got together, we talked about how Kenton is really the expert on SMU here. So I guess Kenton, react to that. Can SMU hypothetically pull off the upset here? What are the chances?
Not only can they hypothetically do it, they can realistically do it. I would say that this is a team that is much more well-constructed than many people would imagine. Everybody thought that Rhett Lashley was a madman when he was just stacking offensive and defensive line out of portal. Like, dude, how many offensive and defensive linemen do you need? Well, do you see the results now? Do you see the results of having one of the most physical, one of the most dominant run games out of a traditionally spread offense that you could possibly see? I'm not saying that this is reminiscent of the Chip Kelly offenses at Oregon, where everything was spread out and you had all these guys and all these motions and all these. It's not that. Rhett Lashley does this in a very, very simple manner. Yeah, we might get in a pistol every now and then, but for the most part, we're going to get in shotgun. We're going to run a little bit of read option for Jennings. We're going to run some power. We're going to make Brashard Smith be our guy, and he's going to do it. Dono can speak to this because if you are a Miami guy, you are de facto an SMU guy because they're known as Miami West now because of how many transfers they got from Miami. But I'm going to tell you, that is a program that in the trenches, they are serious. They are very, very serious. And so the likes of Abdul Carter and company up front for Penn State are going to have to bring their big boy britches for this game because if not only will this end up in a win for SMU, but this will end up in a win in which people are saying, wait a minute, I thought the Big Ten was supposed to be the most physical guys out. I thought this was supposed to be the conference where you could win a game without throwing a forward pass. What happened? Because, again, SMU has the goods in the running game, and Kevin Jennings can be special if you let him break contain. So, they returned the best group of pass catchers in the ACC in terms of production from last year to this year. Everybody said they weren't sure how that was going to pan out. The pass catchers look fine. Preston Stone, at quarterback, was holding them back a little bit earlier in the season. But that is a group that, again, they get it done. And my biggest concern for Penn State you have to exploit the Achilles heel, which is SMU's secondary. I'm not sure if Drew Allen and company have that in them.
Alex, pick up with that because Miami, you also do Locked On Canes and do an excellent job there. And I agree with Kenton a lot that they have the number 3 run defense in the entire country, allowing teams to only 2.8 yards per carry, or holding teams. I shouldn't even say they allow them. That's a top 3 run defense. And Penn State just had its best ground game performance out of all the teams and out of all the situations in the Big Ten championship against Oregon, which was surprising, but it doesn't get any easier here because, as Kenton mentioned, they have the size and the athleticism to be able to bully other teams.
Yeah, and as Kenton was right to point out, being a Miami guy, I do know quite a bit about the SMU roster because they are littered with Miami transfers. And to give Rhett Lashley credit, he's getting more out of most of these guys than Miami did as far as these players who left. And that includes a couple of the defensive linemen. You mentioned being very good SMU against the run. They also are one of the better sacking teams, top 5 in sacks in the country. And players like Jafari Harvey and Elijah Roberts are huge parts of that up front for them. And, Lashley as well is a former Miami offensive coordinator. I think what really makes the job that he's doing there so impressive was some of his previous stops. I wasn't really sure how well-rounded a Rhett Lashley offense was, because at certain times when he was the coordinator at Miami, they struggled to run out of that shotgun. But Rashard Smith, another former Miami guy, a transfer there, has really fit like a glove, and they found so much out of him running the football this season. He's a former wide receiver who converted this year. And yet, to pick up on where Kenton left off, Kevin Jennings at quarterback, I think it's been one of the better stories in the country for SMU, because we were all so gung-ho preseason about Preston Stone, who entered the year as their starter. And credit to SMU for having one of the best plan Bs in the country. And we knew Kevin Jennings was a good quarterback. I don't think we imagined he would be as good as he was this year. We kind of saw him as more of a running quarterback, with Preston Stone having the better arm. But Kevin Jennings has checked off all the boxes so far. And I'm not saying he's the best quarterback in the country or anything like that. He has some ups and downs. Penn State may be able to force him into making some mistakes, but Kevin Jennings has been one of the better stories in the country this year. And SMU, you mentioned, Zach, that you don't look at them as a normal converted G5 team. I mean, what a story, to make the jump from Group of 5 into Power 4 and have the type of immediate success that they had. They didn't win the ACC, but they did put together an impressive comeback bid against Clemson. It's been a really fun team to watch. I know we'll talk about the environment they're stepping into. I'm a little less bullish on SMU actually winning this game than Kenton is, though, for reasons we will talk about.
Yeah, there's certainly the weather aspect of it, the travel. I will say this. If this was a neutral site game, I don't know that I would have as much confidence in a Penn State victory. I've gone on the record to say that Penn State will win 35-21. Kenton, that's probably going to, you're sitting there thinking it's definitely not going to be that. It's going to be a single score game, maybe even a field goal type of game. I don't see a lot of field goals being made when there's 15 mile an hour gusts of wind. So there's that portion of it too. But how close is this game, Kenton, before we take a break here? Because I think Penn State is going to be able to use, the environment, use the stadium atmosphere, the travel aspect of it as well. Penn State has the additional week to prepare and get a little healthier here. I know that SMU, in terms of injury reports, is healthier. But why do they make this game closer? Because I look at the game against Clemson, and SMU doesn't go away, but they were also down 24-7 at one point in time. I think being on the road, that if that situation happens again, that's where Penn State can just say, all right, we're going to run the clock, and it'll be over before you know it.
Let's make one thing clear. The ACC championship was, for all intents and purposes, an away game for SMU. The ACC championship game is in Charlotte. Anybody who knows anything about the geography of North Carolina will tell you Charlotte is one of the southernmost parts of North Carolina. In fact, it's a stretch. It's not everybody. Some people commute up from places like Rock Hill and whatnot to work in Charlotte. So that's how close you are in terms of talking about South Carolina to there, as opposed to Dallas to there. But why do I believe this game will be extremely close? For me, 8.5, give me SMU all day. Money line, I avoid it. And let me tell you why. These are my biggest reasons why. the health factor that you talked about. If Singleton were healthy all year, if he looked like, hey, and don't get me wrong, he had his best game of the season against Oregon last game. Am I right or am I wrong, Zach?
You're right. Absolutely.
He did. He looked phenomenal. I'm not arguing whether or not he has looked phenomenal in that game. I'm saying all season there have been the injury struggles and the nagging injuries. And as a guy that's played at the Division I level, I can tell you, those nagging injuries never quite go away until you get months to kind of, all right, let's settle this thing down. Number one. Number two, James Franklin is still your head coach. I'm sorry to say this. I know this is not fun to talk about, but James Franklin in big games, ladies and gentlemen, break out the Depends and the rubber sheets. Dono's got a little one, so he knows what I'm talking about. You got to get some potty training going because that brother's going to wet the bed every single time in every single big game. And I know that Penn State fans are going to say, well, this ain't really a big game. We'll see. We'll see. And then this is my last and final reason of why I see this game being much closer than the odds makers are making it. With all due respect to Penn State, they have won some games that were like, hey, that's a good win against Illinois. No doubt about that. I give all the respect to Brett Bielema. I love what he does as a head coach. I think he's an instant floor raiser. Outside of that game, how many big games this year can you say Penn State impressed? Not just one, because keeping up ain't enough for me. I need to see you, hey, you won it and you impressed. Or, hell, we can even go just one. How many of those games can you say Penn State, this was a massive game and Penn State needed to show up and they did in a meaningful way and won the football game? That's the biggest thing to me because I don't have enough data on Rhett Lashley not showing up. And the reality of this team is simple. If SMU protects the ball, I've got SMU winning this game. However, if Carter and company can get home, if Reed on that back end for Penn State can pick a ball or two off, now we're looking at a different situation because SMU has certain problems built in as well. They're a little undisciplined in terms of penalties. They're going to give you about a touchdown every game in terms of penalties. That's just who they are. But if they can protect the ball, I could easily see this being a win for SMU.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. And you can take a look maybe at some Thursday night football. The Chargers actually slight favorites tonight over the Broncos in LA. FanDuel has the Chargers laying 2.5. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
The Oklahoma Sooners, they got their guy.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners.
John Mateer is an Oklahoma Sooner. Amidst much worry and consternation and Miami and apparently North Carolina, according to Toby Rowland, the Oklahoma Sooners got their guy. John Mateer is an Oklahoma Sooner.
I mean, I don't like taking victory laps, but I probably should take a victory lap here. I was trying to tell everybody to stay calm, that it was good. Now, granted, that story from Toby Rowland is very fascinating that he popped on there, that in addition to Miami, North Carolina, and Bill Belichick got involved late in the John Mateer sweepstakes. And then Baker Mayfield had to be that dude because, of course, it's Baker Mayfield. And why would I say, of course, it's Baker Mayfield? That's who everybody is comparing John Mateer to. And I'm not going to say that you're wrong. I'm not going to say that you're right. I'm going to say we'll see. But the way that he plays the game, he plays a little dangerously, similar to what we've seen from a Baker Mayfield. But I'm just glad that this is over. John, we've been talking about this for 2 weeks. And I know everybody in the chat is probably tired and just worn out, dropping comments about it. People weren't very happy about yesterday's conversation. And it was mainly because, when is this dude going to get it over with? Well, he's not on our timetable. We're on his. And he finally got into the portal over the weekend after he figured out and had some discussions. He flew in from Washington State, which is a cross-country flight. That's about 5 hours. He got him some rest, came late last night today, and he got his visit in with actually with 2 teammates. We'll talk about them in the next segment. But John, we've got potentially our quarterback for next season with Michael Hawkins, Jet New, and hopefully somebody else.
Yeah, it seems like this was the guy that was going to be the guy all along. And, just to revisit what he did in 2024, 64.6% completion percentage, 3,139 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 826 rushing yards, 15 touchdowns, averaged 4.6 yards per carry. Let's look at his big games against Texas Tech and Washington. Yes, the passing numbers against Tech are not great, 9 of 19 for 115 and a touchdown, but he did run for 197 yards in that game and another touchdown. Against Washington the next week, he completed 50% of his passes, but for 245 and a touchdown, ran for 62 yards and 2 touchdowns. So this is a legit dual threat quarterback, somebody who's going to be able to make plays both with his arm and with his legs. And I'm excited about it, man. I think that your quarterback situation is in a much better place. You've got a veteran, a guy that's played a year of college football. He's gone through some of the mental miscues that you go through as a first-year starter. And now you get to put a little bit better talent around him, a better offensive line, hopefully. Obviously, he's going to have a step up in competition in the SEC. But if he's the gamer that everybody says he is, and if he's as much a Baker Mayfield as everybody says he is, he'll be ready for the challenge.
Yeah, don't get it twisted. The performance he put together up at Washington State, we've seen that done in the SEC before. We've seen heck, go look at Peyton Thorne. He was putting up some running stats and stuff in games on a regular basis too. The only problem was he was making some decisions, or his coach was making decisions, or lack thereof. But that's not the point. John Mateer still has the opportunity to do that, but we'll see. The best part about having him, John, and this is my personal opinion, is that you now have a guy that knows the offense. He understands how everything should be ran, and he can help out everybody else on the staff, on the roster. Because now he can teach the wide receivers the plays. He can teach Michael Hawkins the plays. And that, to me, is the most important thing, is that we've got somebody that can help teach everybody and get everybody ramped up real fast.
It improves your team in a way that you needed to. I mean, going into this next season, you don't really have much margin for error. You've got to make a big jump. You can't have another 6-6 season. You can't. Nope. I think you got to go somewhere like 8-9, push for 10 wins next year to be considered a successful season.
Yeah.
I mean, you bring back a really good defense. The offense still is going to have question marks. It's going to have question marks all offseason because even though you've added a couple wide receivers that we'll talk about in the next segment, there's still going to be question marks surrounding that group, surrounding the offensive line, surrounding the running back room. And so you've solidified the quarterback position at the very least with John Mateer, Michael Hawkins, Jet New. You feel good about where you're at going into next year, regardless of who ends up being the starting quarterback. It's going to be John Mateer. Until something tells me otherwise, John Mateer is going to be the starting quarterback. He's not coming to Oklahoma to be a backup. Will there be competition? Probably, but he will be the starter. And listen, you get a veteran option, a guy that can win games both with his arm and his leg. I'm excited about this decision. And I think with Ben Arbuckle, a second year in Ben Arbuckle's system, that's going to make him even better.
Oh, yeah. A second year in the system, which actually technically his third year in the system because he was the backup to Cam Ward. So
True.
he's been there. So, yeah, and your point still stands. Multiple years in the same system, now with with probably a step up in talent, not probably – actually, no, yes, I will say that. A step up in talent, especially as we're bringing more people in here. All he needs to do is get out there and get the ball into these dudes' hands and let them work. That's the one thing that I'm really stoked about is we've got that solidified. And now, John, as we really focus on the portal and people can now commit, they know. Like, of course, there's questions behind Michael Hawkins. We've seen a little bit of him play. And so you're like, okay, he's not bad. He's young. We just need him to get better. Okay, that's going to happen. Well, from there, now they're looking back like, oh, I saw Mateer put up, 3,000 yards, put up 3,900 yards total with 3,100 being passed and like 800 rushing. He's a gamer. He's put up 44 touchdowns. Okay, he's going to find a way to get the ball into our hands. Awesome. Now you got guys jumping on board because they're excited that there's going to be a veteran player out there in the field. So I guess the big thing now to me is it's got to be a competition. That way, Michael Hawkins doesn't feel like he's being left out in the cold. He's got to be able to have the opportunity to compete. I guess now is how many wide receivers will we be trying to pick up from the portal going forward?
Well, I think you got to continue to add depth.
Yeah.
You've got some good young guys. You've added a couple guys that we're going to talk about here in the next segment, but you've got to add a bunch of competition to the wide receiver room just to see who's going to stand out and who's going to be a really good fit for Ben Arbuckle's system, and then go from there. But when you look at Mateer, what is it that you like about his game?
I like the fact that he makes decisions. He make them quick. He can extend plays. And if he knows that he needs to tuck and run based upon what the defense is giving him, he'll tuck and run. That Washington game was very fascinating to watch him play. And he lit him up for 5 touchdowns. He was out there balling from passes to runs. He was very decisive. And he was putting a lot of strain on that Washington defense. Granted, it's not the same Washington defense that played in the national championship, but still a lot of really good players in that Big Ten team. They were out there dang near winning some games against some other ones in their conference. So there wasn't a bad team. He was out there cooking them. And that game to me was the one I was like, okay, yeah, I think he's a game changer.
And that's what I think too. I think he's got the big arm that's able to make the throws down the field to help stretch a defense, and he's willing to do it. He's not going to wait for a wide receiver to be 100% wide open before he throws the ball. He's going to throw it to a place where his wide receiver can go and make a play, and he's going to trust his wide receiver to make the play. So That's the thing you like about having a veteran quarterback, somebody who's played a little bit. And again, now going into year 3 of Ben Arbuckle's system, he's going to have a lot of confidence just to be able to get out there and sling it, which is something that was a bit of an issue in 2024 at the quarterback position with Jackson Arnold, just the unwillingness to throw the ball sometimes. Again, a lot of issues on offense for Oklahoma in 2024. Oklahoma's undergoing a big reset.